All right, real happy to have the next gentleman on the Sports Card Shop guest line. This guy creates some great hobby content, is a positive force in the hobby, does his own content, and also collaborates with others. We're going to obviously talk about all that great content as well, but I got to bring him on the show. So, Adam from Splendid Sports, welcome.
Thank you, John. It is a pleasure to be here. I've been watching and listening to your podcast for a long time, so this is really exciting.
All right. Well, as I always say, when someone says that, checks in the mail. I appreciate. All joking aside, I do appreciate that, and it's a in this case it's a mutual admiration club here with what your content and stuff. You're a vintage guy, much like I am. I've always been the last couple of years even more so as I've kind of more focused almost exclusively on that side. I even say a lot of the modern I do is just from still setting up at shows, so I have some inventory on there. You started, but going back to the content creation, you started. You did content creation before, but you started your YouTube channel a year ago, and I mean, you're from just a year later, you're in a completely different spot with obviously subscribers and views. Just talk about in a year, how that, a credit to you, but kind of just speak to the fast rise of your content.
Yeah, well, actually, it was I would say January of 2021 is when I zoomed back into the hobby. Like I have the same story as
Yeah.
a lot of people, where I grew up in the 80s, was born in 81, collected during that era, just like many people. Left, and then I really started collecting again back like probably about 10 years ago. And but I wasn't. I always say I was a collector, but I wasn't in the hobby. I noticed that in 2021 cards were going crazy. I happened to catch wind of that, and that led me to look at online and looking at different podcasts. I had no idea there were sports card podcasts or YouTube out there. I had no clue. And I have to say, when I did realize that, one of the first podcasts I ever found was Sports Card Nation. So I want to thank you, because right around that time, I discovered Dr. Beckett's podcast, um, Mike Moynihan's podcast, and your podcast. Those are probably the first three. And so I have very fond memories of just listening. And you were such a voice of reason, in my opinion, because I had found some other stuff, but it was so nice to listen to guys like you and Dr. Beckett and Mike, who have been in the hobby so long, that it was just great to learn that you had a podcast and listen to it. I've been listening ever since. But yeah, right around, I would say, um, actually mid 2021, I started doing a podcast myself. It was pretty inconsistent, but I just listened to so much. I had my own thoughts, my own opinions that I wanted to get out there. So I figured I'd start my own podcast, and I would put the just the audio version on YouTube, and obviously the podcast will go out everywhere else. But then about a year ago, I decided to turn the camera around and put my face out on YouTube and connect with that community. And man, that has been really eye opening, and that's been the best thing so far, is connecting with actual other collectors, because I had collected in obscurity for so long, that meeting people, virtually, and hopefully in person later this year. It's just been great. And
Yep.
yeah, it's just I never knew there were this many cool people on YouTube collecting and making
Yeah.
content. Yep.
Well, I appreciate those kind words, Adam. That means a lot, right? Without people who find the show and stick with it, right? We can't do this, and we're not having this conversation right now. Obviously, I didn't scare you out of the hobby. You're still
Yep.
here. We're appreciative of that fact. Maybe I'll give Dr. Jim and Mike a little more credit than even me. Maybe I was starting to, and they sort of pulled you back in. And anytime I can be used in the same sentence with both of those gentlemen, for that matter, I'll take it. So I appreciate it. You mentioned finally turning the camera on and doing that sort of content. What listen, you're a good looking guy, better looking guy than I am, and I turned it on sooner. Well, what was it that was, I guess what was it that you didn't do it prior, and what was it that finally you said, you know what, I'm going to be me. This is, and I'm going to do this. What was the two sort of, behind each side of that?
Yeah, I think it was well, first I had seen, other YouTubers that have been doing it a while, and they, they were putting themselves out there, putting themselves on camera. And I just felt like it would be a better opportunity, because that was my main goal, was to actually connect with other collectors. And I felt like if I put my face out there, if I put myself on camera, then that would help. And I think it really has. Not that you can't, there's YouTube channels that don't really show themselves. They just show the cards and so forth, and they do fine. But for me, I feel like I've been able to, make some actual friends, and have a lot more fun by doing videos. So it's just, I think it was kind of just like on a whim, like, yeah, let's try it. And I'm glad I did, because it's not really in my nature. I'm more of a private guy, really. Actually, I was never big on like social media. I was on there for work and so forth, but I was never like a person who would post a million times a day about what I was eating and what I was doing and all that stuff. You know?
See, I do that on my Facebook page. I don't
Yeah.
do it too much on like the podcast page, but if I cook on like Fridays, I laugh because I hear you saying I knew right. I cook in Fridays. That's like my day to cook. We each have like a day here in the household. That's my day. And if I cook something and I think it comes out pretty well, I'll post. I tend to post a picture like, "Hey, I tackled this today." But it is true that there is a lot of that. I'm sure there's a few people like, "All right, John, we don't need to know what you have every Friday. Take too much information." But go ahead. I just wanted to chime in.
Yeah, and you know what? There's nothing wrong with that at all.
Yeah,
It's just for me, naturally that's not. I'm more of like, if we were in
yeah,
person and stuff, like I share everything, but like over the internet and stuff, I just
yeah,
never. But so it was a little out of my nature. But for anyone who's out there who is thinking of doing it, and I strongly urge you to do it, because no matter what your nature is, I think it's a great thing. It's a great way to connect with people. And I know of other YouTubers that have actually, not just over YouTube, but have actually, by going on YouTube, have met people that live locally that are also on YouTube,
yep.
and they go to shows together. So it is just a great way to network and meet people, first and foremost.
Yeah, no doubt. Well said. And like some people ask me, Adam, like, hey, I'm thinking about starting a podcast, and I've talked about this on the show, and any advice, and I'm like, listen, I don't want to give you 10 rules. I'm not an expert. I'm not, I'll just, the two best things I can tell you is be yourself, be genuine, and it's probably three, but have fun in the process, right? And if you do those things right off the bat, people can read a person, most people, and can tell when someone's phony baloney in their way to something, or being honest, or being themselves, I should say, which is part of being honest. And I myself will sometimes be on the show and say, hey, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. Or it's my opinion that it's this, but I can't say, and I think people, I found, and I know myself, I'm more appreciative when someone is themselves and honest like that, rather than you feel like they're sort of getting a script or playing a role or taking a stance that maybe even they don't personally believe in. They just know it's going to get people riled up and them attention, right? That's kind of easy to do. And there's times where I know I could do that, but it's disingenuous, and it's just I'm not going to be somebody I'm not. And you definitely fall into that category, if I may say, and that's why I think what you're doing is great. And like you said, you finally say, hey, I'm going to share. My story, my inventory with the community, and go on camera. And it's very, let's be honest, it's very hard to show cards on just audio. It's actually
Yeah.
impossible. So
Yeah.
if we're in the very least, right? But you're doing a great job, and some of your, you're informative. You try to help people out, which is, you can never have enough of that. I love the show you do, the 3 and 3, where someone comes on. three cards that are maybe their top three or some of their favorites, and then other things they may be looking to acquire in the near future. And again, there's building that community, right? They're sharing some of their own stuff that maybe they would. Maybe that's the first time they've even shared that information, right? It's on your show itself, and you're doing a show with Dylan Davis, Double D Vintage, Turn Back the Clock, which I know is like I hear Turn Back the Clock, and I think of those what with those 75 tops cards, right? And but you go back and you guys are both vintage guys, and you share some of your thoughts and pickups and all that great stuff. It's just that kind of, you know what I mean? That's the positivity that I'm sort of drawn to or going to look for. And it's that positivity. Is it just sort of in your nature, or did you have to like kind of hone that skill?
Yeah, I would say hone that skill because, I have, I would say I do have some, some, I guess you maybe negative takes or criticisms, but I usually, it's few and far between usually on my channel. But when I do, it's usually towards like companies in the industry. It's not, I try to stay away from any of the personal stuff or any, I
Yeah,
mean, again, it's not, I'm not looking to do that. I'm here to keep it positive, to have fun, and otherwise I just wouldn't do this. It's like I don't see the point in doing any of this if you're not doing something positive and having fun. Yeah, and I want to say specifically, I have found the YouTube community to be the best thing that I've ever found, because as far as the hobby, and I started off, like when I first started doing this, I was spending a lot of time on Twitter, for sports card Twitter. And again, I'm not a social media
yeah.
guy by nature, really. But I was on there because there's a lot of stuff with social media, with for cards on social media. I hadn't even gone on Instagram yet, but Twitter was where I kind of started. And I'm still on there, but honestly, I didn't get a lot of satisfaction. I made like one connection, and I want to give him a shout out. Bowman 1951. His name's Jeff. Uh, he was
Yeah.
like the first person I went on his channel. We connected over Twitter. There's been a few others, but honestly, it was kind of an empty thing for me. And then I found YouTube, and it was just night and day for me. Just it's such a welcoming community. There's not, I mean, there's some arguments and fighting and stuff that goes on with different videos, but for the most part,
That
I mean,
happens. That
if
happens
you're,
everywhere. So I mean, yeah,
yeah, if
yeah.
you're a
Go
new
ahead.
channel though, like on YouTube, like I was talking about, someone who starts up, it's a very welcoming community. Some of the channels that have good followings, they'll mention your channel, they'll like share your channel if you're a new person in the
Yeah.
YouTube community. So it's not like a real competitive thing. It's more welcoming, and they want to see more people get on YouTube and join the hobby, really. So I think that is, for me, that's the best spot that I found.
Yeah, no, I agree. And anyone that's you were drawn to the positivity and the community aspect of it, and now you're kind of a leading example. So anyone that watches your content, maybe they're the next, Splendid Sports, if you will. Just can't use that name. Adam's got it already. Gonna have to pick a
Yeah.
different one. But you know what? I always say you never know who's listening, who's watching, and what kind of effect that might have on it. And I've had people email the show and say, I was really kind of on the fence about staying in the hobby, but listening to you, so I'm gonna try this angle instead. I'm gonna just change up how a hobby and try to enjoy it more. And the fact that I didn't knowingly was not talking to him directly, but that the content can have a positive effect on someone in that way, right? You never know when it can happen. You never know what episode it's going to be. And so my approach is that every episode can potentially be. Someone might be listening to you and me right now, thinking about launching a podcast, a channel, or just create some random content whenever, maybe not even on a consistent basis, but whenever the mood hits them, right? Maybe it's this conversation, they hear you say what you said, and they're like, you know what? That's it. I'm doing it. I heard what Adam said, and that's always a positive thing. We're both in the vintage. We've seen, we had that huge crescendo during the pandemic. The pandemic's not over, but it's not on the levels as we once knew, and things are sort of calming down. As a seller and a buyer, some sellers it bothers them more than it bothers me. It just I've done this for 30 years now. I've been through it or seen it before, so I'm used to it, so to speak. But some sellers don't like the fact that prices are coming down. But my aspect is, as someone who buys vintage, like it's a great opportunity, right? I was able to even recently buy a card or two that prior I wouldn't even probably search for on an auction site, but now it's kind of come back down. I mean, your kind of thoughts on where the vintage market is and your take on it.
Yeah, I think it's yeah, for collectors it's in a pretty good spot right now. It's the funny thing is it if you look at vintage, it has come down from, the peak a little bit, but it's still pretty high when you look at it historically.
Yeah,
So it's tough to know, if you look into no one knows the future, but if you look into the future, who knows? I mean, we don't really know. Vintage has always been pretty safe, but it has not declined anywhere near, what the modern
yeah,
cards have done. So I think it's a good time, but definitely prices are still pretty high when you compare it
yeah,
to past. So they haven't like crashed. So it's not like where you can buy Mike Trout cards for 50% off that they were, a couple years ago or whatever. You could some of these cards, vintage cards, are actually at all time highs still. If you're
yeah,
it depends on what you're going after. So it's just going to depend, but I think if you're buying vintage, it's you're not doing it for the most part. You're not doing it for like, hey, I'm gonna flip it or I'm gonna just do it. I'm
yeah,
just buying this because I think it's gonna go up in price. For what I've seen, most people buying vintage love it. They love the history and
yeah,
the
yeah,
players and the history of the cards. So with that, regardless of what the price does, I think if you love it, it's a good move right now still. So
yeah,
uh, but I think there's always going to be certain players and certain cards and in certain grades that will probably always go up over time. And then there'll be some maybe that don't. But I think there's some pretty sure bets in vintage that I wouldn't. I don't know. It's pretty hard to see in the future, but I don't see a time when they'll probably go down that much. If any, they'll probably just keep climbing. And hopefully, if they do, it'll be steady, a steady, gradual
yeah.
thing rather than like maybe like what we saw where things were volatile. And it would be nice if it just maybe got back to where it used to be, where it just climbed steadily over time.
Yeah, and you make a great point with the modern and ultra modern. When you look at the percentages, vintage is the lesser percentage of the price fluctuation. So, like you said, there's more. I don't like the word survivability, but there's more steadiness and more, it's more level of precipitation in a good sort of way. I think proofs in the pudding with what people are purchasing, and that's it's a good problem that I have is, I tend to buy a lot of vintage, and then that stuff never you're never going to see it at a show in my showcase. So like when you were saying that, I was nodding because you're exactly right. I tend to like, hey, I don't want to sell this now. I'm keeping
Like your
this, right?
40, your 49 leaf Jackie Robinson, that's not going to be in the showcase.
No, it doesn't even go. People ask me to bring it. I'm like, I'm so worried, like something will happen, or I don't even want to. I'd kick myself, to do it. So I always, I don't bring it with me. I know I've gotten a couple people when local people that listen to the show when I did a card show. They're like, "Where is it?" Because when I said I had gotten it, they thought I would bring it with me. I'm like, "That's not true.
John, if,
That's
if I
in my
may,
office."
I do want to add one thing. When I did start listening to podcasts of sports cards and so forth, like when things were at the peak, right, early 2021, I do want to say
Yeah,
that you were one of the few people that was a voice of reason, and someone I remember you vividly saying, I like that I'm making some of these sales right now. I'm selling cards for these, at high
yeah,
prices, but you were not one of the people who was saying it was always going to keep going up. And that's what I loved, is you were very reasonable. And because you had such a long history in the hobby, this wasn't your first rodeo. So it
Yeah.
was nice. I'm happy I found a podcast like yours to temper maybe some of the other things I was listening to at that same time period. So I
Yeah,
appreciate
well,
that.
well, I appreciate you saying that. I mean, yeah, I'm on, like, I knew, like you said, whether it's the 30 years experience for the 2 cents that might be worth, or just economics, right? Maybe it's more economics just in general, right? We all know, right? I know it's cliche saying, right? What goes up must come down. There's all sorts of the music. The music stops sometime. There's all that stuff, and I just wanted to be honest with that. Like, while I was appreciative that that's kind of where we were at, and I was doing shows at that, well, the ones that once they started back up, but even online sales were crazy, eBay and other selling platforms. I knew, like, hey, enjoy. It's like a ride, right? Enjoy it, because after a certain amount of time, you come back into the station, you get off, and you wait until the next group gets on, and it happens again. You know, I get asked, and I'm sure you might get asked, like, "Hey, when is that going to happen again?" Right? Everyone, like that ride I just talked about so much, right? It's like a ride at the music. That was awesome. Let's go again, to get right back in line. So I get asked, hey, John, you've been doing this a while. When do you think we can and I don't obviously know the answer, right? It's all speculation. So I always say, it's probably gonna be, 4, 5, 6 years, maybe more. It's not gonna be, I don't think, in the next few years, especially, with Fanatics kind of coming in and taking over 3/4 of the current modern market. So I tell people, buckle up, and you better be in, like you say, be in a hobby for the right reasons, and not just the S with the two lines going straight through it. And if you are, don't get me wrong, I understand the question, and as a dealer, it's something I think about. But I've said many times, some of my best shows aren't just about how much money I made, but the conversations that I had with people, and friendships I make too. So it's sort of a balance between both. So I get asked, and that's my answer. When it might happen again. If you get asked that, or if you've already have, like, how do you answer? What's your answer to a question like that?
I usually say in the probably 2050, because it happens every 30 years, right? No, no,
Yeah,
I agree with you
but
that it's I think things have changed though. If I look back to, like, yeah, that time period when things peaked, I think there was also a lot of people that were just not even looking at, like, comps, or the card ladder, and some of these other apps were around, but I don't think they were nearly what they are now. I think what you have
yeah,
now is the people that are buying and selling in the hobby are much more educated. They know the
yeah,
data. They know that you're not going to find people, for, like, generally speaking, that are going to overpay on a card that has a high population. You'll see people overpaying when a rare card comes up and so forth. I don't even know if you call it overpaying, but I don't think we'll see that again with all the data that's out there. I don't think you'll see people just paying prices that are just, like, 50 times what the last one was. Or, it's just because they were coming in with no experience, and they were just throwing money around. I don't even know when the next boom happens. I don't even think it will be to that degree, because there was just so many things. It was like a perfect storm that all hit at once.
yeah,
So I think that there's so much, and this is a great thing. I think it's great that there's so many new companies and so much data out there. I want to give a mention to, I think one of the, maybe it was the one, well, when this comes out, it was, probably a while back, but Next Gem, you just did an
yeah,
interview with.
yeah.
And
Scott,
I
right?
watched that, and I had heard the name, but I never actually checked it out. Well, I checked it out today, and I just downloaded the app because I think it's awesome. I mean, I always have a problem taking
Yeah,
pictures with my car of my cards. So things like that are popping up now. Companies that are making the
yeah,
experience better for people in the hobby. There's more tools. There's more features, and so forth. And I think you don't have to use them, but I think for people like me, that I
yeah.
appreciate more stuff like that, that can be tools in your tool belt that you can use as someone who's buying or selling.
Yeah, make your experience better, right? Maybe easier, right? I'm not a great photo taker, but if you have an app that can kind of hide your weaknesses and enhance what you do, and why wouldn't you use it, right? It makes your life a little easier. And yeah, that's a great answer. And it's now I always say, listen, I don't know. It might, and you joke about 30 years. It might be 30 years. It very well might, when it happens again. And like you said, another great point you made, Adam, was I don't think we're going to see it along the lines like we just did recently. So even that whatever that next crescendo is, right? It probably won't be on that level. I mean, we're also I think we're in a time now where we're seeing discretionary income be less than one of the reasons that time frame blew up and crescendoed was there were stimulus packages, working from home. You could have 8 tabs on your computer open, including your Microsoft Excel, and then behind that you got eBay or your other favorite auction house, and you're looking you're looking at half working and half doing hobby stuff or worse. I won't tell on anybody, but like you said, the perfect storm. I've mentioned it in those terms too. I don't think anyone I listen. We talk about experience. I was on this show and I thought cards were going to be the last thing on people's minds, right? And yet we saw what happened. So what do I know? At the end of the day, right? It's all speculation. So I think it's going to be a while, and I like that message that you give. I try to do the same thing. Like I don't know, and listen, enjoy the hobby, whatever place it's at, and if that picks up again, right? I guess take advantage of the moment if and when it occurs. But like the saying goes, right? Make sure you have stuff where if everything dropped to zero, you would still appreciate your inventory. I think that's some of the best advice I've heard and the best I can give. So kind of, I'm assuming you kind of agree on that sentiment.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, like I mentioned, when I started collecting again maybe 10 years ago, I was basically I would just hop on eBay, and it seemed like, the cards that I was had on my list to get, a lot of them were like Mickey Mantle cards, um, they would be like the same price year after year. It really, maybe they would go up a couple percentage points, but this was during, like, 2013, 14, 15. And I'd have a checklist that I'm still doing that list of, I want to try to get all the Mantle playing days cards if I
Yeah,
can. There's some tough ones on there, but I started off like buying the 56 tops and the 55 Bowman, and when I would look at the prices, they were pretty steady from year to year. There wasn't a lot of price movement, and even in vintage cards like that. So who knows? Maybe we're already there. Maybe we're kind of back to that, where it's going to be pretty steady for a long period of time. I don't know, but there's definitely there's definitely a lot more people collecting now. I know that there's more interest,
yeah,
regardless of what prices have done. I mean, everything I see, the interest seems like maybe still at all-time highs, if you
yeah.
really think about it. So yeah, I think it just, yeah, buy players and cards, and from sets that you want to keep for a long time, and you'll be fine, I think.
Yeah, well said, and I think there is more people, Adam. I think some people left, maybe the quicker flippers that sort of the party's over and all the garbage is on the floor and streamers, and they're like, okay, I'm out of here, right? And to each their own, right? But I think the point you made even earlier in the conversation, the ones that stayed, right, are in it for maybe what we would call, or some would call, the right reasons, or they're enjoying the hobby regardless of price structure or price valuations. And so I think the hobby is still growing. People are still coming back. I hear it all the time, or I'll get a message like, "Hey, just got back in the hobby after double-digit years out. Found your show. Can I ask you a couple questions?" And I always, obviously, always say, yes, I'll give you my best answer if I know. And so the hobby's growing by the minute. Anyone that wants to, grab a mic or a camera and say the hobby's dead or dying, go to a card show is all I can tell you. You know, look at views and downloads on content, and the hobby's alive and well. It's in a different, might be in a different place than it was a year and a half ago. There's nothing wrong with that, but the hobby is thriving. It's alive, and you're always going to have the sky is falling people, right? That want to grab that megaphone and warn you of impending doom and gloom, and that's their opinion, right? They That's the right to do that. But I've done this long enough. You've been in this long enough to know the hobby's alive and well.
Yeah, I just did. You mentioned 3 and 3, which I basically, yeah, show I do on YouTube. I've done 19 of them now, where I just bring on a collector and they show three of their favorite cards, and we look at three cards on their want list. And one of the ones I did recently was a channel called the Card Story, THA Card Story, and it's a father and son,
Yeah,
and they collect Hank Aaron cards. So I think Tyrus, he's 11 years old, and he loves Hank Aaron cards. So I mean, things like that. I mean, I love seeing stuff like that, and I'm not a big card show guy at this point, but I hope to in the future. But yeah, everything I see with card shows is young kids. So
yeah.
yeah, I think the future is really bright. Absolutely.
Yeah, no doubt. And I'll tell you this as setting up, either setting up or going even as a consumer, Adam, to the card shows. I'm seeing a lot younger kids buying vintage and talking about the players they're buying and learning about the history of the game. Not just the player, but even the history of the game. They're developing an affinity for, hey, like I love Mike Trout. He's arguably one of the greatest players currently playing, but people came before him that really set the stage or were the bridge to get where we are now. And we're seeing a lot of younger people sort of respect that, go back and honor that, or learn about it, or take an interest. I even see kids in school where I am, will take out books to learn about those players. Like the interest is there, and that always warms my heart as a kid who was like that, and as now an adult who was like that. For me, it was Jackie Robinson who died a month before I was born. I never saw him play in person. My father was lucky enough, but growing up in Brooklyn, I also know, what he meant on and off the field, and in a way more off the field than even on. And so I took an affinity to sort of what he stood for, and but once the card attachment went to that, it was easier to do. It was easier to collect back then too, than comparative to nowadays. But I love seeing we're seeing more kids get into that into the vintage space, and whenever I see it, I mean, I'm not a huge smiler, and it always brings a smile to my face. For you, it's Mano. I mean, obviously, Mano's a legendary icon. What was it that drew you to Mickey?
Yeah, that would be my dad. And people
Yeah,
ask me this all the time because I'm originally from Massachusetts, so I grew up, a Celtics fan, a Red Sox fan, and so I collect football, Tom Brady
yeah,
cards. So I don't do all vintage,
yeah,
but I guess Tom Brady's becoming vintage now that he retired. So eventually, he's that old anyway. But
yeah,
I collect, collect Tom Brady, Larry Bird from basketball, obviously Boston players, but and then I collect Mickey Mantle. So people are always like, "What's up with that?" That was just my dad. I'm, going back to when I was a kid, growing up in the '80s. I was collecting, the Wade Boggses and the Roger Clemens and Canseco's. But one of the maybe a little different things about me, I remember, than my friends is I was way more into like the players from my dad's era. Like because he would tell
yeah,
me about Mickey Mantle, Willie Mays, Hank Aaron, Stan Musial, Sandy Koufax, all these guys, all these legendary stories. And they just all seem more interesting. Even when I was a kid, like the stories of them, I hope that someday that Jose Canseco would be on that level, right? Because I got his cards, but it never worked out. Like those guys are still just the greatest legends, the greatest stories. Ted Williams, that's actually where the
yeah,
Splendid came from in the name Splendid
yeah,
Sports. I always liked the Splendid
yeah,
Splendor name. It came. So yeah, it was just always those players always fascinated me. And yeah, when I basically Mickey Mantle was my dad's favorite player growing up, and
Yeah,
he passed along all the stories, and they weren't all good stories either. He did it the right way because he didn't idolize Mickey Mantle. He just loved the story of a lot of it
yeah,
was just really unrealized potential. So in many
yeah,
ways, it was like a lesson to me. Like, yeah, he was one of the all time greats, but he could have been
yeah,
better than Babe Ruth, but he wasn't because. And so even as a young kid, I would learn that, and when I got older, I that was the player I wanted to try to collect first because of that, because of my dad. Yeah, and you've heard that story before. It's you like to
yeah.
collect your dad's favorite player, so that's basically what I've told my dad. Dad, you cost me a lot of money with that.
You owe me. You owe me.
Yeah,
That's funny, and it's great, right? It's those bonds we share, right? Whether it be in your case with your dad, might be another relative, it might even be just a friend or a teacher. Who knows what it might be? And it's funny to hear you being from the Mass area and being man,
yeah,
but that again, it's that connection with your dad, and it was your dad's, and you even can learn, like you said, I can learn a lesson. He was sort of as great of a talent as he was. He was, a flawed human. He said that himself. I'm assuming you've seen it, but in case you, and for anyone else out there listening, he did a Bob Costas interview. It's a good length interview, 30, 40 minutes. I'll watch it again every couple of years, even though I've seen it. One of the best interview I've seen of a person, and it's Mickey Mantle at his humblest, and basically telling, like, knowing sort of that he was closer to the end than the beginning, sort of telling people, like, use me as an example of some not things not to do, because it's costing me now. For as great as it was on the field, it's not all great, and it takes a lot to admit that and do that, and do it in a national setting. And so, a little information there. That it's a Bob Costas Mickey Mantle interview. It's pretty famous, and it gets me a little choked up. I'm not a Mantle guy per se, man. Maybe in the same fashion as you, but being a New York City kid, everyone knows what Mickey. I mean, he's a baseball icon. He's not a New York icon. He's a sports icon. We didn't even go past even baseball. And so, pretty good stuff to see that. And you know, unfortunately, gone too soon, but did not take anything away from what he did do on the field while he was playing. A little shorter career, like you mentioned, than it could have been, but even in it was just a great one for the length it was. And love that stories. Let's go back to a little bit of the content creation. You're doing this turn back the clock show with Dylan Davis, and I don't know if there's you can get two guys and put them together that will be that positive about the hobby. You can only tie it, and most people will fall short. But how did that come about? Like, talk about how that all went down, and for those listening, it's everything you do is great, but when you guys team up, it's greatness times two. But how did that all come about?
yeah. He's become my best friend in the hobby, and basically when I started making YouTube videos, I wasn't aware of his channel. YouTube's weird, you they don't show you all the channels, so it's like it's hard to find a lot of the channels. But what was great is he left a comment on one of my videos. Somehow he found it, and he left a comment, and then he left another one. And when people leave a comment on my channel, I check out their channel if they have one. And so I checked out his channel, and I immediately knew I liked him. I loved his channel right off the bat. If anyone hasn't gone to Dylan's channel, Double D Vintage Baseball Cards, first of all, he's got the greatest card wall and room that I've seen. I mean, the thing's just incredibly built it himself. But he's just, I could tell right away how authentic he is. He's a little different in the fact that he didn't take the break that a lot of us did, where, you go through high school and college or whatever, and you get out of cards. He's been he's been collecting cards. He's been doing it, but he did it all through his life, but he did it basically in obscurity too. Like, he didn't know anyone else. He just did it because he loved it. And he still has that same enthusiasm. He he's probably seen these same cards a million times, right, over the last 25, 30 years or whatever. But you could tell he just every time he looks at these cards, it's like he's seeing them for the first time, and he has just amazing passion, and he's an authentic guy, and that's what drew me to him right away. I could tell right from his channel that he wasn't trying to pretend to be someone else. He was just being himself, and yeah, he's just from there we connected and commented back and forth, and eventually, yeah, it just led to, hey, for me, it's just I just like being able to talk to him every couple of weeks, so it's kind of like whether people watch or not, and luckily we do have some people that watch and listen, which is great. But either way, I would just love talking to him for a half hour, an hour every couple of weeks anyway. So yeah, we got a show, Turn Back the Clock, and we just cover past, present, future of the hobby, different topics, and it's just fun. So yeah, Dylan is just a credible hobbyist, and yeah, lucky to have him out there. Really, I'm so happy that he commented on my video
Well,
that I was able to find him.
yeah, it was meant to be, right? And I know you didn't pat yourself on the back there, so I'll do it for you, Adam. But hobbies, better place with both of you guys in it as well. So we talked about Mano. I waxed a little bit on my Jackie Robinson affinity. I always say there's some great players that sometimes don't get enough hobby love. I think sort of overshadowed by the Mantles and Mays of that era. What if I ask you that question and put you on a sort of a mini hot seat, right? Some undervalued vintage players, or maybe undervalued. It's not the best, underrated, right? People sort of forget them, which obviously does affect sometimes card values. A couple names that pop in your head right off the bat.
Well, I always go first to Stan Musial. For
Yep,
me, maybe that's changing a little bit. I don't know. I hear maybe a little more as far as like people talking about him on YouTube and so forth. But YouTube's a small part of the hobby. But yeah, I always say
yep,
Stan Musial because he doesn't have as many cards as some of the other players. Because there were years where he had no cards, and he was
yep.
in when in the war and so forth. But yeah, I always say Stan Musial. If you look at just what he did and how great he was, he's for me, he's a top, he's in the top 10 of all time greatest players.
Yep.
And yeah, if you look at some of his card prices, we were looking at one the other on one of the threes I was doing. And, his rookie card, the 48 Bowman, is really, I mean, compared to someone else's rookie card, like in his era, that,
Yep.
I mean, it's pretty affordable. Some of these other 49 Bowman, I mean, there's some real early Stan Musial cards that I think are still pretty affordable. You know, another, I
Yep.
mean, Ted Williams, even. I mean, if you look at Ted Williams cards, that's the funny thing about, Mickey Mantle is he's a perfect example of hobby pricing. It doesn't always make sense,
Yeah.
right? Because as you know, Mickey
Yep.
Mantle wasn't the greatest baseball player of all time. He could have been, but he wasn't. And yet his prices of his cards have always and still are as if he was the greatest of all time. So that's a cautionary thing for maybe new
He's
people
a
getting the hobby.
blonde,
That doesn't always
blonde,
add up.
blonde haired, blue eyed starting center fielder for the Yankees. And again, he put up a Hall of Fame career, incredible numbers, but sort of those other things that go along with it, right? Definitely enhanced the legend. I even throw Jeter in that category, right? Good looking young guy when it's starting shortstop from the Yankee. And I'm like, I sold a lot of this stuff 93, 94 because I thought, man, this guy, I don't know how he's going to live up to all this hype. He wound up doing it. Kudos to him, but different type players. But I sort of put him sort of in that same category of that those lights burn hotter in New York and make you even more of a legend than you already are. They both are. I'm not trying to say they're not. They were elevated to that status, but I think that legend's even bigger uh, under those circumstances. And so somebody might say, Ted Williams, are you great? Like people know how great he was, but he sort of was overshadowed. They played their careers overlap, but they weren't concurrent. But it was that New York, Boston kind of thing. I think a little bit. So I see that Musial for sure. He's probably one of the top two on my list. You know, when I think about pitchers, right? Bob Gibson is a guy,
Mhm.
you know, that just batters scared to get even in the box against the guy. That's how good
Right.
he was. You know, he was Randy Johnson sort of before Randy Johnson, and quite frankly, better with the way he and Randy Johnson's very good too. Don't that's not a slight to Randy. I'm just that's how good Bob Gibson was. They changed rules to try to make him more hittable from like the height of the mound. Like that's insane. And I just think his stuff is like he's not respected in the way like his body of work. It might be as simple as sometimes pitchers don't get revered in the same fashion. Like they say, chicks dig the long ball, card collectors do too, right? He wasn't a hitter, but guy like almost every time out was just didn't have too many bad games. It's just and just dominating. And you look at the numbers; they're just insane. And when I buy some of his stuff, I'm like, I can't believe I'm buying it. For that, like that's just doesn't seem right. I like it because it's a bargain. Brooks Robinson's another guy for me
Yep.
that sort of fits. Just how many? I mean, arguably the best fielding third baseman in the history of the game, and he could hit too. It wasn't like he was, if it was just he's a Hall of Famer on his fielding alone, and he could hit the ball as well. I just think he played on some great Baltimore teams with some fellow great players and Frank Robinson and others that I think sometimes he wasn't looked at with the affinity he should. But Ernie
That's one.
Banks,
Frank
uh,
Robinson. How
yeah,
about Frank Robinson that you just
yeah,
mentioned?
yeah,
That's a
same
perfect one.
team. I
Yep.
think I think playing together like that almost hurt the
Mhm.
both of them as how they were viewed. Yeah, Frank Robinson fits that bill. Later became even a player manager. He was playing and managing a team at the same time, and then managed full time when his career came to. Ernie Banks is another
Yep.
guy people don't talk about enough. Sort of playing in the shadow of some bigger names during the 50s and 60s, your Mays, your Manels, and those guys. And when you look at the body of work, he was just a quiet kind of a guy, just went about his business, and, I think very great buy to pick up some of his stuff. If we leave anybody off, I know I sort of answered my own question with a couple
Well,
people.
I think we're obviously we've been talking a lot about baseball, but I actually think vintage basketball and vintage
Yeah,
football, they could, I mean, just as like a category, and obviously some of the guys within that, but I think vintage basketball and vintage football is pretty, it's a little overlooked and it's a little undervalued,
yep,
especially vintage football. So I think
yep.
I collect all three sports, so I would say, yeah, look for some of those vintage football guys, that the Gale Sayers and the
Yep.
Jim Browns, and I mean those, as football
Even
as
Walter
a
Pay, even Walter Payton,
yeah,
even Walter Payton for his rookie card is way too cheap if you ask me. And one of my favorite sports records, not football records, but that guy played in 168 straight games at the running back position,
wow,
getting tackled, 20 times a game. That's for those that are keeping track or are good at multiplying. It's 16 game seasons. That's 10 straight. It's 10 and a half. So just think about your fantasy football team, right? When you're making out your lineup and the guy's always questionable or he's out, right? How many games certain guys missing you're pulling your hair out like he's out again. Think about this. Walter Payton played 10 and a half straight seasons without missing one game. And he
wow,
actually he here's the I'll further that stat by saying he only missed one game in his whole career, and that was in his rookie season, and he fractured his ankle, and he wanted to play. It was the Bears team doctors that told the coach he's not to step foot on the field. If they wouldn't have said that, he would have played on a fractured ankle, and he would have never missed a game. Well, we don't know what would have happened playing, but assuming he came out unscathed of that game, he potentially would have never missed a game in his whole career. Went on to play 10 and a half straight seasons. That's just to me, we talk about the Cal Ripken streak in baseball. We talk about DiMaggio's hitting streak in baseball and other records. LeBron just broke the all-time scoring one recently. Uh, to me, that one is just not talked about enough when you think about, heck, most football players' careers don't last 10.5 years,
Right.
let alone play in that many straight games. So it's just one of those records that doesn't get enough shine or love or talked about enough. So anytime I can, so when you bring up those and you make a great point, Adam. Vintage basketball, football, because baseball was king for so many of those years, right?
Mhm.
Now those now that's not in the same vein, right? So it was overshadowed by when you thought baseball card, you thought baseball card. It was called, but that was the first sport you thought of. And you're right, football. There's still some great deals to be had in both of those markets if you collect it and enjoy it. And I know I always it's on my search list. I'm more football than basketball for me, but I do buy some basketball. It goes kind of football and baseball actually pretty close. Than basketball, than hockey. I try to dabble in at least all of them in some capacity. But there's some great deals. There's some underrated values and players across the board, and you just got to look. And that's always the fun part too, right? Is the journey to acquire the cards you acquire. But appreciate you coming on, Adam. Love what you're doing. Love the content. Splendid sports stuff. The stuff you do in collaboration as well. I know a lot of other people do, but for those that maybe don't know yet, give out where people can find you, social media, anything you want to share where people can find out what you're doing and the content you're making. Go ahead.
Sure. And actually, last before that, I just want to say the hobby is the people. Never has
Yeah,
a tagline been more true, in my opinion. I think when you coined that term, that was the best thing because it's so true. It really,
yeah,
I have found that. So I just want to say that. I wanted to mention that was a beautiful thing you came up with. And yeah, you could just Splendid Sports on all the places, YouTube, and if you're gonna find me anywhere, I would love you to look me up on YouTube. And feel free. I'm looking to connect. I always want to connect. So feel free to, send me a message. My email's right on my YouTube channel. So yeah, I would love it if people connected with me there.
yeah, no doubt, man. Love your stuff. Keep it up. And like you said, I love the fact you said, "Hey, reach out. I help you out any way I can." I know you're like that. I try to be like that. And so, a great advocate and an ambassador for the hobby. We love as well as many other people. So yeah, check Adam's stuff out. You will not be disappointed. Thanks, Adam.
Thank you, John. This was great.